Have you ever found yourself lying awake at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, asking, why is this happening to me? That kind of question doesn't come when life's going well. It shows up when the walls are caving in, when you're exhausted, but sleep won't come, when everything feels pointless. This episode is for the moments you don't post about on your social media account. The silent car rides, the fake smiles, the breath you hold in just to keep from crying. It's for the times you feel like a ghost in your own life, present, but barely. We're not here to pretend that life is easy or that faith makes it all okay. We're here to talk about what it's like to struggle for meaning when the pain is loud and God feels quiet. But what if the search for meaning isn't the enemy? What if these moments are the very soil where something deeper can take root? What if this ache you feel is sacred? I'm not offering cliches that we hear in church or quick fixes. I'm inviting you into a conversation that's honest, fragile, and full of hope. Let's explore what it really means to find meaning even when it hurts. That's what comes up today on the Truth Be Told Project podcast.
Living by design, not just living by default. We are focused on our purpose, we don't compromise our walk. We got faith, we got vision, we are reaching for the stars. Stay true, keep it moving, cause we know just who we are. Yeah, biblical insights, community driven, practical living. Yeah, this is a whole vibe. Together we get it, together we winning. Yeah, here to make an impact that'll last. So welcome to the Truth Be Told Project podcast.
You know, I've learned that pain doesn't knock. It doesn't knock. It doesn't tell you it's coming. It just shows up uninvited, sometimes with a whisper, other times like a hurricane. There are moments in life when suffering hits so hard, it feels like it knocks the breath right out of you. A diagnosis, a betrayal, a loss you didn't see coming. Suddenly, your world becomes smaller. It becomes darker. Everything you once relied on feels very shaky and very fragile. And what makes it even heavier, that quiet expectation in our culture to bounce back, to stay strong, to trust God without even flinching. But here's the truth: suffering hurts, it confuses, it breaks you in places you didn't know could break. Maybe you felt that. The kind of pain that makes even the smallest task feel impossible. The kind where you find yourself scrolling through your phone just to escape your own thoughts. You may even try to pray, but the words don't come. Or worse, when they do, it feels like no one's listening. And then there's the guilt. Shouldn't I be grateful? Shouldn't my faith be stronger than this? You start to wonder if you're the only one unraveling while everyone else is keeping it together. Let me say this clearly: you're not broken because you're hurting. You're human. Grief, sadness, anxiety, these aren't flaws. They're signals. They tell us something mattered, something was lost, something isn't right. And sometimes the weight is so heavy, you start to feel numb, like your heart has gone quiet to protect itself. Even joy feels foreign, like it belongs to another version of you, one you're not sure you'll ever meet again. The Bible doesn't shy away from suffering. David cried out in despair. Job cursed the day he was born. And one of the shortest verses in the Bible tells us that Jesus wept. And still, we feel pressure to hold it together. Like pain is a weakness, not a part of life. But what if we stop pretending it doesn't hurt? What if we allow space for the ache without trying to fix it right away? Sometimes the most faithful thing you can do is admit that you're struggling, to stop trying to be okay and just be, to cry, to be angry, to feel lost. That's not failure, that's honesty. And honesty is sacred ground. Pain isn't just a nuisance to be solved, it's a messenger, a mirror, a portal. It reminds us that we are alive, that we care, that something deep inside us believes in goodness because we feel the absence of it so strongly. And while it might not make sense right now, it's not meaningless. There's something sacred about being fully present in the struggle. You don't have to rush through this. You don't need to have answers. You just need to breathe one breath at a time, one moment at a time. And maybe that's where healing begins. Not in fixing the pain, but in recognizing that you're not alone in it, that your struggle matters, that your tears are seen, that you are healed, even when you don't feel it. Point of this is the question. It's not a question of logic, it's a question of survival. Because if there's no meaning, then what are we even holding on for? We're wired to search for purpose, especially in pain. We want to believe the tears we cry, the nights we can't sleep, the pieces we're trying to hold together, they matter somehow. That this isn't just some cruel cosmic mistake. But when you're sitting in the mess, in the middle of the ache, meaning feels distant, almost offensive sometimes. Because how can something so painful be allowed to have value? Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there right now. And maybe the most honest thing you can do is admit, I don't know what this means. I don't see the point. I just want the pain to stop. That's not weakness. That's honesty. And believe it or not, that's the first crack where real meaning starts to seep in. You see, we often think meaning comes after the healing, that once we feel better, we'll look back and suddenly get it. But more often than not, meaning shows up in tiny ways during the pain. In the friend who texts you right when you're about to give up, in the way your heart softens toward someone else's suffering, in the strength you didn't know you had to face another day. We think we need big answers, but sometimes it's the small mercies that whisper, you're not alone. Now, from a Christian perspective, this search for meaning isn't just a philosophical exercise, it's a spiritual invitation, not to understand everything, but to trust that God is still present. And even in the mess, that doesn't mean everything happens for a reason, but it might mean that nothing is wasted. There's a passage in Romans that says, we know that all things, we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him. It doesn't say all things are good. It says God works in all things, even the broken ones, even the heartbreaking ones. Meaning isn't about wrapping pain in a pretty little bowl. It's about believing that even in the darkest places, there's still light, however faint. And sometimes meaning doesn't arrive like a revelation. It arrives slowly through showing up, through trying again, through holding on just a little bit longer, holding on longer than you thought you could. Maybe meaning looks like being able to sit with a friend in their grief because now you know how much it matters. Maybe it's the courage to open up, to stop pretending you're fine. Maybe it's realizing your story, messy as it is, can be a lifeline for someone else. Pain shapes us, not always into who we thought we'd be, but often into someone softer, deeper, and more real. Faith doesn't erase the ache, but it gives us a frame to hold it, a way to believe that redemption is still possible, even if we can't see it. And sometimes faith means just whispering, I don't understand, God, but I trust you're still here. You don't have to decode your pain like a puzzle. You don't have to figure out the lesson before you're allowed to feel. Meaning can live alongside confusion. It can breathe beside grief. It can whisper through doubt. You are not failing just because you haven't found the silver lining yet. Some days meaning is as simple as getting out of bed, as brave as telling the truth, as holy as refusing to give up. Maybe you won't understand it today. Maybe not for years. Maybe not ever fully on this side of eternity. But faith invites us to believe that meaning is being formed, even when we can't see it, even when it feels like silence, even when your heart feels too tired to hope. So, if all you have today is a broken heart and a shaky breath, that's enough. God can work with that. He does work with that. And it's often the very place where something sacred begins. You don't have to make sense of the mess. You just have to stay present in it. And maybe, just maybe, one day you'll look back and realize that even though it didn't make sense, it mattered. One of the biggest misconceptions about faith is that it's supposed to fix everything. That if you believe hard enough, pray long enough, or say the right verses out loud or make positive confession, the pain will go away. The storm will pass, the miracle will come, and sometimes it does, but often it doesn't. And when it doesn't, it can leave you wondering if your faith is broken, if maybe you're the problem, if God is silent because you're not strong enough, not faithful enough, not spiritual enough. But what if we've misunderstood faith altogether? Faith was never meant to be a magic wand to make all your problems go away. It's not about controlling the outcome, it's about staying rooted in everything when everything around you is shaking. Faith doesn't always fix things, but it carries you. It carries you through the sleepless nights and the questions that don't have answers. It carries you when your prayers feel empty, when you can't feel God, but you whisper his name anyway. In fact, some of the most powerful faith isn't loud, it's quiet. It's holding on when you feel like letting go. It's getting up and choosing to live when your heart feels dead inside. Jesus never promised a life free of suffering. In fact, he said the opposite. He said, in this world, you will have tribulation, you will have trouble. But he followed with a promise. Take heart, I have overcome the world. That's not a quick fix. That's a companion in the storm. Faith means you can cry out in agony and still be loved. It means you can be full of doubt and still be held. It means you don't have to be strong all the time because God's strength shows up best when we're weak. Think about it for a second. The very moments we feel most inadequate, most unsure, most overwhelmed, those are the exact places where God's presence meets us. Paul wrote about a thorn in the flesh, something painful, something persistent. He begged God to take it away. But God's response wasn't, okay, I'll fix it. It was, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. That doesn't sound like the prosperity gospel. It sounds like a God who chooses to sit with us in the mess rather than pull us out of it immediately. And maybe that's what we really need. Because if we're honest, the kind of faith that only works when life is perfect isn't real faith. Real faith has stretch marks. It's weathered, it's bruised, but it's still standing. Sometimes faith means praising God in a whisper. Sometimes it means dragging your tired soul to Him and saying, I have nothing left. Please carry me. And He does. Not by erasing the pain, but by walking with you through it. Think of the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were thrown into the fire for their faith, but God didn't put out the flames. What God did was He showed up in the fire. He stood with them, and they came out not even smelling like smoke. That's the kind of God we serve. Not one who promises us a pain-free life, but one who promises never to leave us in it. Faith carries that faith that carries is quiet but unshakable. It's what keeps your heart beating when everything else says give up. It's what turns brokenness into testimony. So if you feel like your faith isn't enough right now, hear me on this. Please hear me on this. You don't need perfect faith, even if it's messy, even if it's tired, even if it's hanging on by a thread. And when you feel too tired to believe anything at all, lean on the faith of others. Call someone, text someone, let someone else hold up the corner of your mat, like the friends who brought the paralyzed man to Jesus. Because faith isn't always individual, sometimes it's communal, and that's a gift too. God doesn't wait for you to have it all together, He meets you in the unraveling, and He carries you one breath, one step, one moment at a time. We don't talk enough about fragile strength. What kind of strength? That kind of strength that isn't flashy, that doesn't shout, the kind that keeps going quietly while shaking, the kind that cries in the shower, wipes its face, and gets on with the day anyway. There's a beauty in that because real strength isn't about being unbreakable, it's about being breakable and still choosing to love, to hope, to show up. It's strange how suffering changes us. We begin to see things differently. We speak more gently. We carry stories behind our eyes. We become more human. In those moments of deep vulnerability that we start to realize we don't have to be superheroes. We just have to be honest. And there's something incredibly brave about admitting you're not okay and yet still move forward. The Bible is full of this kind of strength. Moses doubted, Elijah ran away, Peter denied, and yet God used them all, not despite their weaknesses, but through it. Because God isn't looking for polished, He's looking for willing. There, there is this verse in Second Corinthians that says, we are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair. That is fragile strength. It doesn't pretend things are fine. It acknowledges the pressure, but it keeps going. We've been taught to define strength by outcomes, success, power, confidence. But biblical strength is defined by dependence, not on our own abilities, but on God's presence. It's the kind of strength that allows you to fall apart and know you're still held. It's the kind that says, even if I don't have it together, I'm still loved, still worthy, still seen. Strength looks like resting, saying no, letting people in, letting God in. Sometimes it looks like showing up to church with puffy eyes and a silent prayer, just get me through this hour, Lord. Or making a meal when your heart's not in it. Or answering the phone when you feel like hiding. And here's the wild part. God calls that strength because He sees the fight beneath the surface. The courage it takes to keep breathing when everything feels heavy. You don't have to prove yourself to God. You don't have to earn his love by pushing through. You already have it, even in your most fragile moments. There's something powerful about broken people walking in faith because their light isn't coming from perfection, it's coming through the cracks. And those cracks, they let the light out. They let people see what's real. They let others know they're not alone. In fact, some of the people who've encouraged you the most, they probably weren't the ones with perfect lives. They were the ones who said, yeah, I've been through it too, and I'm still here. That's what fragile strength does. It builds bridges, it creates community. It says, you don't have to have it all together to matter. It also makes you more empathetic. You start to notice others in pain more easily. You start to care more deeply. You stop judging and start listening. Fragile strength turns us into safe spaces for others. It transforms shame into compassion. It turns personal trials into spiritual depth. So, if you're holding it together with duct tape and prayers right now, that counts. If you're walking through the valley slowly, that counts. If you're questioning everything but still whispering your prayers in the dark, that counts. Strength isn't loud, it's faithful, it's steady, it's real. And your story and all its mess and beauty might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Not because you're a hero, but because you're human. And in God's hands, even fragile strength becomes a testimony. Let's be real sometimes. Life just doesn't make sense. You do all the right things, you pray, you trust, you try, and still things fall apart. Still, you end up in a place you never thought you'd be. And in those moments, it's so easy to ask, what's the point of all this? It's a question that echoes in hospital rooms, at funerals, in heartbreak, in silence. We want meaning to arrive like a lightning bolt, clear, loud, undeniable. But let's be honest, most of the time, meaning comes like a whisper, like a seed, and it takes time. Meaning doesn't always look like a dramatic turnaround. Sometimes it looks like being able to sit with someone else in their pain and say, you're not alone. Sometimes it's the quiet confidence that even though you didn't choose this path, you're still growing. And from a Christian lens, we believe that God is weaving something eternal in what feels like a temporary mess. But that doesn't mean it's easy. It just means it's not the end of the story. We often want to ask why, but maybe the more helpful question is, what now? Why do I do what do I do now with this pain, this uncertainty, this broken thing I didn't ask for? And the answer is really fancy. It's usually something like love someone or rest today, forgive, show up, pray one more time. It's in the small choices that purpose starts to form, not as a big revelation, but as a quiet unfolding. And the truth is, meaning is never just for you. It's not about making your pain worth it. It's about becoming someone who can carry light into someone else's darkness. You don't have to pretend everything's okay. You just have to say, you just have to stay open to the idea that it could be someday. Meaning doesn't erase the pain, but it does give it a direction. It tells your story that there's still more to come. And you, right now, right here, you're in the middle. You're still in the middle. You haven't missed your purpose. You haven't fallen too far. You're not behind. You're being shaped tenderly, slowly, and sometimes painfully, but always purposefully. and you don't need to see the end to keep walking. Some of the most meaningful people in the world are the ones who walked through fire and refused to become bitter, who chose kindness anyway, who forgave even when it cost them, who stayed soft in a world that told them to shut down. That's the fruit of pain with purpose, not perfection, but presence. So if it feels like the meaning hasn't shown up yet, keep going because it's coming. Maybe not all at once, but piece by piece, step by step, breath by breath. And even now, in this moment, where it all still feels unresolved, there's something sacred happening. You're growing, you're becoming, and that matters more than you know. If you made it this far, thank you. Thank you for sitting in the hard places with me, for choosing honesty over performance, for allowing space for questions, for doubt, for fragile strength. We talked about pain, about the search for meaning, about the kind of faith that doesn't always fix, but always carries, and about how strength doesn't have to look like confidence. It can look like showing up just as you are. You're not alone in your suffering. You're not forgotten in your struggle. Your story is still being written. And even if the chapters feel heavy right now, there's more to come. More hope, more clarity, more healing. So take a breath and remember, even when it doesn't make sense, it still matters. If this episode spoke to you, if it gave you a little more space to breathe or helped you to feel a little less alone, please consider sharing it. Send it to a friend who might need it. Subscribe for more conversations like this. And if you feel led, leave a review. It helps more than you know. Once again, my name is Jay, and I would like to encourage you to not only live by default, live by design, God's design. Peace.